who you're partnering with and their character, in my mind, just trumps everything.
What if your firm's deal sourcing professionals could win more deals by mastering the art of relationship building? Imagine crafting outreach that truly resonates and asking the right questions at the right time, all while building a genuine relationship with the person on the other side of the table. In today's episode, we're exploring all of the above in a conversation with Rod Jimenez, CEO of SHR Group, a leader in hospitality management and distribution technology. Rod has led SHR through serious growth, and today he's sharing his insights on his experiences with private equity, including what works and what doesn't for engaging founders like him. In the conversation, we'll cover Rod's background and how he built SHR, the importance of timing, patience, and asking the right questions when engaging a business leader, and Rod's experience navigating private equity partnerships, including the outreach that really stood out and the outreach that didn't. If you're looking to engage founders like Rod and build better relationships in the M&A world, you're in the right place. I'm Matt Rooney, and together with my co-host Dan Herr, this is Deal Sorcery.
Rod, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Firstly, I've got to say, man, congrats on the transaction with Access, right? Like the next chapter for SHR. It just sounds so exciting. Like I was seeing, like obviously you guys are joining sources with Guestline and company. Like that's huge.
Yeah, it's really interesting and really promising. It's a great thing for our clients. It's a great thing for our team, and yeah. So the Access Group, the hospitality division within the Access Group, is growing very quickly and expanding very quickly, both internationally, but with a huge focus here in North America. So it should be very, very interesting. And you were there at the very beginning of things, so you should be proud too.
Oh man, I was looking at our calendar earlier, and I was like, has it seriously been like 6 or 7 years since we first sat down at High Tech together? Like
it has been crazy, huh?
It's awesome, man. Like I've like to your point, like I've had the unique pleasure of kind of this front row seat of what, at least from my perspective, some of SHR's most amazing, growth, like this amazing story that you guys have had. So maybe just kicking off there, like for listeners at home that haven't had that front row seat that I've had, can you maybe give the 30-second elevator pitch for SHR and the customers you sell into and the value prop that you guys provide as a business?
Yeah, SHR sells a unified suite of applications for the hotel industry, and those are interoperable and enhanced with process automation and AI, and they cover everything, as you mentioned, from distribution, which is CRS, rate optimization, which is RMS, and guest profile and loyalty, which is CRM. And then we wrap around the applications, we wrap around a set of services that include digital marketing, web delivery, and actually revenue management for hire. So it's everything that encompasses generating revenue for the hotel. And part of our mission is to make the hotelier's life simpler, so that they can be better hoteliers by trusting the technology and having technology that they can rely on and help them do their day-to-day job without any headaches.
Oh, I love it though, right? I mean, I don't know. For some, maybe it's because I grew up in the hospitality space, like on a resort, like when I was a kid, right? Like my dad running a resort, but like I've always enjoyed like understanding all those different connectivity pieces, and there's so many of them, and it's evolved, I think, kind of organically over time, right, into this like big nested complex environment. But I think the core to it is like SHR is like a core system of record, right, for hotels to maintain and run and operate day to day with the ability to actually sell inventory and generate revenue.
Well, it's an interesting point to ask, I think, our next question. I'm sure that you weren't thinking about private equity buyers and investors at this point because you just put this product out in the market and you're focusing on scaling the business. But I'm curious, what was your first exposure to private equity to investment firms reaching out about SHR or what you were working on?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually obviously back in the iHotelier days. It was one of those things when, iHotelier was probably a couple of years, maybe less than that, maybe a year into it, and I would get emails from private equity folks, and I remember at the beginning, it's like, oh my gosh, people are interested in us, you know, and then pretty soon I figured out that no, they're sending that to 100 people. And then obviously our first, we had a couple of serious conversations during iHotelier history, and then ended up, with the transaction with TravelClick. Then once we were in the windsurfer stage, obviously we had started with our own resources, and we felt like we didn't have a tremendous need to go source outside capital. We were just focused on growing the business and getting clients. And as luck would have it, we went to talk to a pretty large prospect, and they happened to be owned by a very large uh, real estate company out of Singapore. And so we went through a lot of demos and, evaluating commercials and all of that. And then they came back and they said, well, we don't, we don't want to buy technology. It's not going to do anything for our business per se, just bringing one vendor versus the other. And it's going to be kind of a painful thing to change, but we would do it if we owned the company. And so this is like really only like a year and a half into our windsurfer history. And so we're like, no, we're not. We just, because as you can imagine, seller's remorse, whether we should you should have it or not, it's always there, right? It's like once the transaction closes, you go, should we have done this? Yeah, but but with the iHotelier transaction and TravelClick, a lot of us said, you know what? I think we could have waited. We had hit the 9/11 bump and how that affected everything, and I think there was fatigue on our side. We saw a lot of potential internationally, and then we felt that we needed a partner that could take this there. And again, it's some of it is probably unfair, right? But those were the feelings we were having, right? And so we said, next time we're not going to rush into any kind of transaction. We're going to take this on our own as far as we can take it. And so we're a year and a half into it, and somebody says, well, we want to buy it. And so, we said no. The conversations kept going. It was a very interesting, very large client, and in a very respectable, very great reputation uh, owner, right? That we would be partnering with. And so the conversations kept going probably for about a year. And so that was our first outside investor that eventually came in. It was actually a strategic, and it was a strategic based out of Singapore. And so I think, Dan, when you and I talked the first time, probably one of my first comments was, well, we have a strategic investor that is probably not interested in selling.
Right.
And so, you know, um, so anyway, so that's how, the second time we were not necessarily looking for growth capital or, private equity investment, but we ended up doing the transaction because we saw, again, the potential of growing in Asia, the potential of growing internationally, and the credibility that it was going to give us to bring that very large client into the portfolio. And those things did materialize, and they were a fantastic partner. But when Dan and I met, and we can get into that in a little bit, but um, the motivation there was mostly about, okay, we don't know really, or I guess we knew that our partners in Singapore were very long-term investors, and there was probably not a lot of interest in selling. We were feeling like we needed a more present partner closer to us, where were much more aligned on the outcome, because they were very good as a partner. Again, incredibly honorable and trustworthy and all of that. But we were a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the size of the company and all of that. And so that created a bit of a um, weird situation for a while, because myself and the management group were sort of thinking, I think we need more rigor in terms of a partner, and more focus, and a lot more direction, if you will, and alignment in terms of the outcomes of the investment, right? And so that's how on in the as part of the um, SHR journey, that was the first, and actually that's how we ended up with the name. That's how we went from being Whiteboard Labs to being SHR, because that's the name of the company that they owned in the US. And that was kind of part of the deal, that they combined. And without getting too much in the weeds, we created a new entity. We contributed something, they contributed something, and that was a new entity that carried on. But the name of the new entity then became Scepter Hospitality Resources. And so we just it was so hard to do anything logo wise, marketing wise. The spelling of the word was the British spelling. And so then we just decided, you know what, we can just rebrand as SHR and not change anything officially. But we changed the logo, we changed the domain name, and then we became SHR about a year after that transaction with the folks in Singapore.
I'm curious, Rod, like thinking back to when we first met and we're spending time together, I think I was at Serent, maybe it was like 2018, 2017 sort of time frame. How many private equity firms or like potential suitors do you figure you were talking to at any given time at that point?
Well, I think, sort of superficial conversations, probably 5.
Like 5 at the conference, or like 5 overall?
Probably 5 overall.
Okay.
Yeah. So not a lot. And the reality is that when we started thinking about, maybe when the time is right for our partners, we need to be ready to present something, and, have some level of sense as to valuation structure, how it would happen if that door ever opened, right? And so that's when I said, okay, well, I'm gonna start paying attention to some of these emails. And as you know, Dan, a lot of them are very junior people. uh, and so then, so I would filter out the emails immediately when they would say, "Oh, um, Rod, we're following SHR, and we're very impressed with what you're doing in the hotel management space." And we're like, "Okay, you don't know what we do."
You don't even know what we do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so delete. So then some other ones sounded more informed, or they said, "We're invested in this company," which is in the company I would recognize as, okay, so they know the space. So I would answer, and sort of the same thing. It was a very early call with very sort of like just okay, how large are you, and how
Right.
many clients, are you profitable, those kinds of things. But then you realize that it's, again, a fairly junior person. In some cases, those answers led to, oh, you know I'm going to bring so and so into the conversation, and then uh so then I had a few of those conversations going, and I think that going back to, I was trying to figure out how we ended up talking, and I know it was because either you sent me an email or a call that resonated with me. Like I said, okay, Dan gets it, right? Either it was what you said about our company that was so specific that it caught my attention. And then when we talked, I think you were probably one of the few that really knew what was going on, and really understood and talked about the players. And it wasn't necessarily all about, okay, I just have these 5 questions that I need to ask from you, and then say, oh, can I tell you a little bit about our firm? And then, okay, great, thank you very much, let's stay in touch, right? And so I think we met at High Tech. And I think then you started to tell me more about Serent. I was not familiar with Serent. And at the time, I don't think Serent had a very large, you guys had Noland, and you were starting to build the hospitality tech portfolio.
That's right.
Uh, but we had the very, I mean, and I felt like I was talking to somebody that understood the stage we were at and the competitive environment that we were playing in. And so I think then the next thing that happened is that you can't, and before I go there, the other thing that was clear is that I wasn't dealing with with what it felt with a lot of the other ones. It was such a junior person. Again, I don't want to
Interesting.
be,
Yeah, yeah.
into, we were all junior at some point, right?
Sure.
But it's like, you know, yeah, it's 30 minutes of my time that it's, I know it's not going to do anything. And so I think that every conversation that we had afterwards, it got more and more detailed. And then the next time you brought Dex in, and Dexter already knew a ton about us. And so, and again, we couldn't do anything right away. And so one of the impressive things was the fact that you said, it's okay, we'll just stay in touch. And then it got more specific. And I think by the time the opportunity for a conversation with the guys in Singapore, you guys, you guys knew a lot of very detailed information about our company. And so it was a very easy transition to be able to act very quickly. And I think that that readiness was probably what made the deal happen. Because when they said, well, what would they be talking about? What kind of valuation, what kind of structure, what percentage, et cetera. And then within a few days, we had an LOI.
Right.
But that wasn't because you guys were so amazing that you could take a company you knew nothing about and then have an LOI 3 days later. It's because you had invested a year and a half of relationship building. And so what ended up happening was that we didn't even think about running a process. We didn't think about engaging with anybody else, which I think, again, a lot of people would say, well, that's stupid. You should always run a process. But we were so comfortable with the relationship and who you guys were and how you conducted business and how well you understood our business, that if you match that with the need for speed in terms of the the opportunity being there and probably going away if things didn't move quickly, that all came together to materialize in the transaction that we completed. But it I guess part of the lesson or the message that I have there is that it takes a lot of work, right? On both sides, right? Because you sort of are betting on somebody being interested genuinely, and then you guys are, I mean, investing all that time, and the outcome could have been, hey, Dex, Dan, Lance, we really like you guys, but we're gonna go run a process, right?
For sure.
And
Yeah,
so,
and to your point, like it's a bet or a gamble on both sides to an extent, right?
Mhm.
But it's also like a massive prioritization exercise, right? So like just to it's really awesome like to hear that thought process on your side, right? Because like the things that I was doing on my side, like again, you never would have known this, but like that high tech that we met at, I had 53 meetings over 3 days.
wow,
Right. And like that, but that, that was that's part of the job, right? Is like for
yeah,
me being out there and not just like, but like, yeah, for sure. I wanted to build a relationship with you and like, you're amazing. And I've always loved our conversations and our time together. But like, there's also a lot of other people that I'm,
yeah, yeah,
trying to build relationships with too.
because you don't know where I'm at, right? So
I want to ask you a question that the point about outreach from junior people, it's such a common way that firms structure their sourcing teams is to hire a bunch of junior people. And there's varying opinions on the success of that. But maybe just to kind of ask you to talk a little bit more about it again, assuming someone sends you a message, some form of outreach that doesn't immediately reveal itself for not being thoughtful with like, you're in hotel management or something like that. Um, you receive that outreach. What do you do next?
yeah, so so like to give you an example about the ones that are filtered out, right? Like I get an email this morning from a firm that said, "Hey, we're following SHR, very interested. Whenever it's the right time for you to have an exit, let us know." I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I bet you if you just Google SHR, the Axis transaction is going to come up. But anyway, so so those come in, right? And I think that you filter out the ones that obviously you go, or it's for a while there were a lot of search funds that you get those emails. I'm looking for one company, blah blah blah. I think the challenge was, and I think that to counter or to approach that challenge some way, you have to go with familiarity, right? Okay, it's X firm that I'm familiar with, and I know that they own this other company that's in our space. So yeah, I should talk to that company, and I mean to that firm, and then typically then even if it's a a junior person, they have enough exposure to the industry and all of that. And after a while, what the game is, and you go, okay, you know, here's what we're doing, here's where we are, the kinds of things that you're willing to disclose so that you can make their job easier, right? And so that you now then understand that it's going to go into, the system, and then it's going to be put next to the other, you know, 5,000 people that Dan is talking to and all of that. But that really is when, reputation and presence in the market starts to make a difference as to who you select to talk to. Now, once Serent was an investor in SHR, that changes because we sort of divided and conquered, right? It was very easy for me to say, okay, is this a serious conversation. And in some cases, at that point, it's the banker that you're already talking to, right? And so I was taking very few sort of new calls, although we did participate in this symposium that uh, for a couple of years, one of the symposiums that Baird put together, right? And so that opened. I kind of like that model. It's sort of rapid dating a little bit, but they get to see a video about the company, and so they say, okay, that sounds interesting, and then they said, yeah, I would like to talk to that CEO, uh, and so then when the 15-minute Zoom meeting happens, it's very to the point and quick, but they've already gotten a lot of the preliminary information through the video. And so it's like, you said in the video that you're growing in Europe. How are you approaching this or that? So it's very specific. And then you get to learn about the firm, right? And after that, I would get together with the Serent guys and say, okay, here's kind of the summary of those conversations. And we would say, okay, this is one that we should continue to be engaged with, right? And so then in some cases that stayed with me, in some cases that went or most cases that went to Serent to carry on with the relationship and the conversations. So it changed a lot once we were part of the Serent portfolio, as far as what conversations we engaged in and how, and were those conversations that I would keep, or were those conversations that I was just going to introduce Serent, or in most cases they already knew those people and say, oh yeah, we'll reach out to them. If they reached out to you and they say they're interested, we'll reach out to them and see if there's anything there.
Sure. So before the transaction with Serent and outside of conferences or events like the ones that you mentioned, I'm not sure if you were tracking this, but do you have a sense for like the number of outbound or the number of messages you would receive from potential acquirers, investment banks? You mentioned independent sponsors. Do you have a sense for just like the quantity?
So a steady flow of maybe 2 or 3 per month, and then peaks depending on either some announcement that we made, or a post that went on LinkedIn or something like that, that all of a sudden I would get 20 in a week, right? And then it would just sort of settle back to you know a few every month.
So that's what it was like back like 2018 timeframe. Is that what you're saying? So like, if you think back to like you say 6 years ago or whatever, it was kind of 2 or 3 per month, and then little peaks or spikes of maybe 20 in a week.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What did that look like as you flash forward and look at the last year, maybe? Right? Is it been any
Yeah.
different like prior to the Access transaction here?
Yeah, I mean, I think prior to the Access transaction, because probably a lot of people are, if they've got the data on us, right? They're figuring, okay, it's about 4 going into the 5th year of the whole period with Serent. Something's going to happen here at some point soon, and so then, yeah, over the last year, it was really probably double that. Yeah.
Oh, so like 2 to 5 a month sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And is that primarily investment bankers or private equity firms or strategics?
Well, a combination, I would say, probably, and it's probably, if you include investment bankers, so it's probably, that was my number, is private equity and search funds and that kind of thing. So on the investor side, and then you probably have an equivalent number on investment bankers.
So like 2 to 5 a month of
Mhm.
either private equity firms, search funds, or strategic acquirers, and then another 2 to 5 a month of investment bankers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have any way of tracking these conversations, Rod? But thinking before the transaction with Serent?
No, I never created an Excel sheet uh, tracking any of that. I was just, I was very quick to filter out the conversations that I felt were going to lead somewhere. So I was not at any point in time sort of seriously talking to more than two or three people.
Sure. So it was important that Dan followed up and stayed persistent.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Ron,
Yeah.
I know you were mentioning like obviously the conversations that we first had, like it sounded like you appreciated that, I and we had some knowledge of the space, knew other players, right? Could hopefully came with some sort of perspective on these things. But what, like, when you think about the other folks that you engaged with back then or over time, like, are there certain characteristics of the folks that you spent time with? Is there anything that you've, felt appealing about those conversations that stands out?
Yeah. I think that, I consider myself a pretty good judge of character. And so that, my perception of that and chemistry, honestly,
Hmm.
right? It just, as simple as that. I mean, do I do I enjoy talking to this person, right? And so I kept thinking, okay, we had a great conversation, Dan. So I really like Dan. He came prepared. He knows our industry, all of that, and I felt there was kind of a connection there, right? And then it's like, oh, I'm going to bring Dexter. And it's like, okay, so Dexter must be the jerk. And then you meet Dexter, and it's like, oh no, he's somebody I would want to spend time with. And then you bring Lance in, and Lance, it's the super friendly guy, and it's just you know to me that's sort of what built. And when I was picturing, and this became the reality, when I was picturing, okay, these are people that I'm going to be on my board, right? That I'm going to be answering to, that I'm going to be partnering with. Can I picture disagreeing with them, and how would they approach that? And that's totally, a guess, right?
Totally.
Because we're all dating, right? I'm trying to portray that I'm a great, you know, operator and manager, and I know what I'm doing. You guys are trying to portray that you know how to grow companies, and that you're, people of integrity and all of that. So there is, as we said earlier, there's a bit of a, no, not a bit, a big bet that goes into that. So that's where time becomes. I mean, we didn't design it that way, but that time that we had gave us that opportunity, I think, for me and probably for you guys, to sort of solidify on those things. So to me, I just immediately rejected the idea of, I'm willing to put up with not liking somebody or not picturing my ability to work with them day in and day out because they're a more well-known firm, or because maybe their valuation is going to be better or whatever, right? I just I just thought, for not just for my sake, but for the sake of the rest of the team, that was such an important thing. And it's very hard to do that in a sort of, it's very hard to pressure cook it, right? You can only do it with time. And in our case, we luckily we kind of we had that, right?
It's interesting, right? Because I feel like most folks, when they think about how can we close more deals, in a given year, deploy more capital in a given year, like, to your point, like they're oftentimes thinking about, well, gosh, like, we just need to see more volume, and we need to put better offers out there, and like, we need to be in front of the opportunities at the right time. But like, you're validating at least something that I've always thought, which is like people want to do business with people they like at
Mhm.
the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? Like, and that's like the baseline foundation to build upon.
Yeah. And it's your baby and it's your team and you want to be super careful. So all of that factors very heavily, right? I couldn't stress that enough. Um, and I don't think I would do it any differently if I were doing it again today.
When you think about, obviously, like one of the things that our listeners are trying to understand better is like, again, how can I build relationships? How can I engage folks? Right. Obviously, we've spent some time on that relationship building aspect of it. But I'm curious, are there any specific types of outreach or engagement techniques? If you're like, put yourself in my shoes for a minute, right? Like, are there any of those that perhaps stood out to you over the years? Anything really unique that you feel like you responded well to?
And this is, from my personal perspective, one of the things that to me was a trigger was, and I think we mentioned it already, the wrong information, right? It was just like, come on, just, it would be a lot easier to say, hey, I'm with company XYZ and I'm just interested in finding out you know, how you're doing, how your company's doing, right? I know nothing about your company, would love to hear, would love to learn something, right? I would take that email over a, oh, I know that, you're in the, hotel um, PMS business and all that. And I was like, no, we're not in the PMS business, right? And so maybe unfairly, that was such a trigger for me that I was like, oh, this is ridiculous, right? And or a lot of bragging about like this happens a lot, right? I think I think firms think that they can stretch the presence, like, oh, we are familiar with the space because we invested in company XYZ, which is marginally in this space. And so trying to stretch it into relevance for the space that the person you're trying to reach is in, I think backfires, at least with me, right? And
Like if I said, we've invested in, compete in the restaurant tech space, and therefore I know hospitality.
yeah, yeah. I think it would be better to say we've invested in compete, and that puts us in the hospitality space. But we're very curious about the hotel side of the business because it's a natural extension, and I think almost appealing to, like, I want to talk to you to learn more about this space
Mm.
before you say, oh, I'm an expert in this space, because if I say that, then I think the perception is that I would only entertain an investment from a private equity firm that knows my space, right? And that, I think that plays an important role, and it may be a good card to play if you have it. But if you don't have it, I think it's better to say we're just super interested in the space and we just want to learn more about it. And so I would filter out a lot of those.
And so you'd be more receptive to somebody approaching you with curiosity than with, fake conviction and an absence of knowledge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, that fake conviction of saying, we really love what you're doing because fill in the blank. And that description that is in the blank is completely wrong, right?
Yep.
We, again, I would see things like, say, we love how you're creating value for hoteliers by doing XYZ, which was not what we're doing, right? And so to me, it's a lot easier or a lot more palatable to have somebody say, we're very curious about your space and your company seems to be doing some interesting things. Would love to have the opportunity to learn more about it, right? Um, so
it's interesting, right? It brings me to this kind of bigger question of like, Rod, if I let me put you in the seat of a BD person in private equity for a minute, right? Like if you're sitting there saying, okay, like I've got maybe a new space that you know nothing about, right? Like, and I'm not going to presume you know nothing about K-12 education, but I'm just like I'm going to throw you in K-12 education for a minute and say like it's a new industry, it's not hospitality. You've got to try and break into and build relationships with quality CEOs. What would you do?
Yeah, I think again, I would use the uh, the curiosity card and say we're seeing this in the space. It's growing at this pace. It's becoming more digitized. It's becoming, much more relevant for this segment of the K through 12 scale where it wasn't before, and that's what we know. But we really would love to see your perspective in the space and how your company is participating in it before sort of throwing out the card that unless you're for sure that those facts about the company are true. Like, I saw your announcement about blah 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 blah. That sounds really interesting. Would you would you take 30 minutes to tell me more about it? Right? Now you're appealing to the not just sort of the ego of the CEO or founder, but the fact that it's like, oh, I mean, if you're into it, you love talking about it. And somebody's saying to me, I'm curious about what you're doing because it appears to me interesting from here. Then I'm going to say, yeah, I'll tell you about it because I love it, you know?
So like if I'd approached you and said like, hey, Rod, I don't know anything about the CRS space, but like it seems really interesting. Like, could we sit down? I'd love to learn some more about it. Like you'd be open to that?
I would be 100% open to that. I would actually like it way more than, 10 years ago, we invested in this company that was in the restaurant business. So, you know, the hospitality industry is in our DNA. Yeah.
I hear that. But we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I kind of want to phrase the question again. Was there we talked so much about how timing is so important in these like relationships. There's the initial outreach, and hopefully, you're able to establish contact. But really, you have to wait until it's the right time for the business to you get to a point of a transaction. So, was there a turning point that you recall that made you feel like it was time to do a transaction with Serent? Was there a turning point or a catalyst that made you decide to do a transaction?
I mean, we didn't need our partners in Singapore were very willing to fund the business every time we needed growth capital. So it wasn't necessarily the need for capital, but I think, and this may be a little bit of a chicken and egg kind of situation, at least in our case, right? Because we had a partner who was committed to the business, that was supportive, but we didn't have the closeness in terms of the operation of the business and the rigor of the approach of growing the business. And so that's kind of what we started to think, and I started to think uh, that we were missing and that it would be good to have. So as I then started talking to Serent and started learning about their approach and the growth team and the kinds of things that um, that relationship would open up, and the way that they would approach the growth and the goals that they were talking about in terms of, yeah, this is what you need to get in 3 years, right? That then became much more interesting, and so that's why I was saying that maybe in our case it was a a bit of a we don't know if we need a partner. It feels like we do, that we need a private equity partner in the US. And then having started the conversations with Serent, it became very clear that, hey, this would be a really good thing for us. And then it all depended on when our partners in Singapore were going to be ready for an exit. And so those were the three factors that were kind of combining to get us to a point where, again, we were ready, the partners in Singapore were ready, and then Serent was ready. Now, we didn't know that point of readiness was going to be March of 2020. March of 2020. So
that's a whole other conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of looking forward a bit now. Obviously, had the transaction with Serent, had the transaction with Access. How are you spending your time now and going forward? Like, obviously, do you ever think you'll get into the kind of private equity advisor, board member sort of seat yourself, or what's the future for Rod hold?
Yeah. So right now I'm, heads down on the integration process with Access. It's a very different situation than what we had with Serent, right? I mean, I think with Serent, it was like the business itself just kept going, and then we just started, putting plans together, exploring where the growth team could help, structuring the board, things like that. This is different, right? This is like we're being absorbed into a much bigger company. And we went through that with TravelClick, but TravelClick itself was kind of forming a separate division, right? And so that felt like we were kind of over here by ourselves. But this is different. And so it's something that um, I'm putting all of my effort right now into make sure that we have a successful integration, make sure that we deliver on the expectations in terms of all of the synergies and all of that. And so super busy period right now because of that. To your question about do I see myself in the future maybe participating in private equity, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great process. I mean, having been through it, done well, it's a great thing for companies and for management teams. It's too early to say if if an operating role would be something where there would be a fit. I'm sure there could be a situation where that's a possibility, but I do feel that um, I it would be great to be on advisory roles and helping uh, founders or CEOs, especially in that stage where you are in that limbo stage of being too big to be small and too small to be big. And taking a company from $20 million in revenues to 50, $60 million in revenue, figuring out the operational structure and the dynamics of how the organization has to change to achieve that, and then looking at M&A itself as a source of growth and doing that the right way. We did a couple of transactions inside of SHR that I think were great catalysts for the outcome that we saw.
You mentioned that you found the private equity experience to be highly valuable for you and your management team. What did you like? What stands out to you as most valuable about that experience?
For us, or for me personally, let's put it that way, the board that we had was a game changer. And I'm sure if you talk to some people within SHR and maybe folks in our management team, maybe there are folks that said, "Oh, I wish we had never, we could have done it ourselves. We didn't need Serent," right? But for me personally, the value of the board and access to that level of collective wisdom, if you will, and I keep saying that word rigor, but I think that that's sometimes for founders, especially, it's hard to deal with because we're kind of used to having the last word and being kind of mavericks in some to a large degree. But if you accept that and you make them part of the team, that relationship is so valuable. We, as we just mentioned, we went through some pretty tough decisions early on and very early in the investment period. So it was kind of baptism by fire. So it was very that's where that character and the caliber of the person that you're dealing with on the other side starts to become super important, right? And so that tested all of that for us. And then we developed a great relationship, and we went through, differences. We dealt with them. They pushed me. In some cases, I responded well. In some cases, I didn't respond that well. But it was fantastic. I think that I would single that out in terms of I would value that more than the growth team, for example, which is in itself very valuable, right? Having access to saying, hey, you know what, we need to review our go-to-market strategy, and then to have somebody parachute in and help you think through those things from the perspective of an outsider that has the benefit of seeing data from many different companies. It's very useful. But I think that the pressure of having a group of folks that you're aligned with as far as what you want to see as an outcome, and then giving them the freedom to speak into the business and criticize it from a positive perspective, and then push you and encourage you and challenge you, right? Is to me as a CEO that operated again with a very friendly and very committed partner before Serent, but that didn't have the bandwidth to be that present and that involved in the business. Then having that was a game changer for us.
I love having the retrospective. It's like we get the bookends here, right? Like we kicked off the relationship and I get to see the tail end too. This is
This is
awesome. Obviously our audience here is private equity firms, partners, professionals. Any final words of wisdom for those private equity professionals out there that are looking for and trying to source that next deal?
I think other than what we've already said, I don't think that founders value the content of the intro message as much, right? So I would say take some of that pressure away. Just use the information that's out there that is true. Again, some announcement that came out, something that maybe happened and you're curious about, and maybe that curiosity is not genuine. Maybe you have the answer, right? But if you say, hey, look, I just saw this announcement. I'm curious how it impacts your company, right? I think that it takes the pressure away of saying, I just need to impress this company or this manager or this founder with my knowledge of the industry. Now, if you have it, that's great to put out there. And then, but I don't know, again, and this is, I know that some people may have a completely different view on this, but in my view, I I I sort of give fewer points to that, because then my reaction would be, well, of course you should know. You're talking to a bunch of companies and you're in the deal flow, and you know, if you're saying that you are in this space, then yeah, you should know more about what we do and who the competitors are and all of that. But if not, I would just come out again. I think that if what you're looking for in an initial interaction is, I just want to know how big this company is, right? Because that's part of the problem with all of our websites, right? They all look like we're, $1 billion company. And so in some cases, I'm sure from somebody in your shoes coming into that conversation and then thinking, wow, this company looks really neat. And then they go, yeah, it's three of us and we've got the $100,000 in revenue. It's like, whoa, we're going to have to wait a while. So getting to that, maybe there are ways of getting to those answers quicker in a much simpler, direct way that doesn't take, organizing a call and getting, because that's the other thing that is really frustrating for me. It's the drip campaigns, like
Like the automated follow-ups.
the automated follow-ups, right? And so
Turning some of mine off in the background here.
yes. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that was my rambling about, I don't know if I gave you any like really blinding flash of insight as to how to do sourcing better, but
no, I think it's really helpful, right? Which
yeah.
is like, I think overall the points that we've emphasized, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like the points that we've emphasized for folks is like, perhaps don't come to the table espousing, knowledge that you don't actually have, right? And I think two is to perhaps consider coming with a angle of curiosity versus false conviction, as well as to focus on building the long-term relationship and that kind of people dynamic that I think folks sometimes forget about, right? You kind of put you do it in sales all the time. I feel like too, right? It's like you put a face on and you kind of like have your kind of sales face, and it's like, no, like the first thing that you should be doing, at least from my perspective, is like come to the conversation from this place of long-term relationship building, trust building, and ultimately vulnerability, right? Of like just starting by being a real human, build that human to human connection first, and then you can do a lot of the other things. But like if you don't have those prerequisites, you're not going to get anywhere. So I don't know if those are the right three of like.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, going back to our conversations, I think they were very, I think you asked me a bunch of questions, but they were, curious and informed. And I think I viewed you as a very likable guy, and like, you didn't, it was not arrogant. It was not pretentious. It was just very natural and very respectful of the time. And then now we had a relationship, a very nascent relationship, but it was there. And now the next time I think you called me, you said, I'm going to be in Houston. And I said, come over. All right. And so, and then that went from there. And then you brought other folks and it wasn't a month. It was a year and a half. Right.
Right. That's right.
If you had to sum up private equity in one word, what would it be?
From a founder's perspective, I would say optionality.
And then for people who want to learn more about you, SHR, Access, or get in touch with you, where should they go?
shrgroup.com still has all the freshest content about what we bring to the table for a hotel. And then I'm at Rod.Jimenez at shrgroup.com.
Well, Rod, this was a great conversation. I really appreciate your being so generous with your time. I think it's a lot of valuable insights and lessons for our listeners. So thanks again.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.